Greetings and welcome. If you haven't watched my previous video in this series, Your Money and the Church, number 9, you really need to. Otherwise, you're not going to be up to speed on many of the things that I cover in this video. So all you have to do is click on the link that I have provided for you in the show notes below. Watch that video, then you can come back and watch this video and you'll be up to speed with us. So what I'm going to do in this present video, part 4, is I want to look at briefly some of the things that I mentioned in my previous video, and I'll put them up on the screen for you, and this will take us right into today's video. In my previous video, I mentioned that I would be doing 2 videos that would prepare you to properly interpret the 2 New Testament texts that are commonly but mistakenly cited in support of you giving money to your church each week for the upkeep of a building and to pay the pastor a salary. They are 1 Corinthians 16:1 and 2 Corinthians 9, verses 6 and 7. Well, you've seen the first one, the first video, video number 9. This is the second video, and it is designed to set the tone, or not only set the tone for the rest of this series, but also to set the stage for me to answer the objection that someone has to pay for the building. Well, in my previous video, I also stated that the Bible nowhere ever instructs us to provide money for our church for the upkeep of a building, nor to pay the pastor a salary. I also mentioned that one of the common responses that I get from certain Christians at times is, well, someone has to pay for them. Well, if you'll recall, I made the statement that this is a man-made problem. And I ended my video by promising to answer this objection, and I fully intend to do so, but momentarily. Now, before I play the video clip that I'm about to play, I want to point out that for the first 300 years of its existence, the church met almost exclusively in private homes, not in public buildings. And so the move from private homes to public buildings had what I call a catastrophic threefold ripple effect. And let me explain. As I mentioned earlier, for the first 300 years, the church met in private homes. And so by moving the church's gatherings from private homes to public buildings, our so-called leaders created a self-imposed, man-made problem or financial responsibility, or the need to pay for a building when this is something that God never intended nor designed. This was followed by the unscriptural practice of salary-based eldership, approximately 75 years later, thereby placing a financial burden on the people of God which he never intended. And make no mistake about it, it is a burden for many, especially single mothers and others who are struggling to make ends meet. Then comes the third damaging effect, which is, in my opinion, the single most catastrophic damaging effect that is the direct result of the church's move from private homes to public buildings. And this is the removal of the practice of the priesthood of all believers from the church's corporate gatherings each time it meets. But just what is the priesthood of all believers, you might ask? Well, many Christians have never even heard of it. In most churches, it is an unknown doctrine. Well, the Bible teaches that all Christians are priests and have direct access to God, and that they each share in the responsibility of ministering to the other members of the body of Christ by exercising their spiritual gifts each time they gather for worship and instruction. Well, this practice, which had been an integral part of the church's Sunday and midweek gatherings for approximately the first 300 years, was removed when certain so-called church leaders of the 3rd century decided to move the church's gatherings from private homes to public buildings. This, in my humble opinion, is the single most damaging effect. It is the result of the church's move from private homes to public buildings. And now to set the stage for my next video on the single most catastrophic damaging effect that our so-called leaders created when they decided to move our Sunday and midweek gatherings from private homes to public buildings, the 2.5-minute video clip that I have for you. Every year, our so-called leaders pour millions of dollars into large and sometimes gargantuan-sized church buildings, like the Yoido Full Gospel Church building in Korea, an Assemblies of God denomination. And although they are not a Christian religion, Roman Catholicism has outdone most religions and sport some of the largest church buildings on the entire planet, like St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, which stands apart from the rest of the largest church buildings on the globe. And not incidentally, Constantine, the Roman emperor, built the very first St. Peter's Basilica way back in 329 AD. And we're going to hear more about him later in this video, including his ungodly influence on the church and church buildings. And so, returning our attention to large Christian church buildings, Liverpool Cathedral in England. It is the world's 10th largest church building and is the world's single largest Anglican church building. In 1901, an architect was sought to erect the church building, and as a result, Gilbert Scott was awarded the task of designing the building. However, shortly after he began the design, due to complications in his health and the World War, its construction was paused, and then it came to a complete standstill due to his death in 1960. Eventually, it was completed in 1978, and it sets itself apart thanks to its massive bell tower, and it combines both Gothic, Revivalist, and modern styles of architecture. And so, many mega church buildings host tens of thousands of people each week, and many have more seats than some professional sports stadiums. And so, because of their immense size, their formidable exterior structure, their stylish or elaborate design, millions of Christians view them as a sign of success. However, their glory is in their shame, as I will make ultra crystal clear. And this is because with the building comes the self-imposed, man-made financial responsibility of having to pay for a building when this is something that God never intended nor designed. So we have seen at least 3 intricately connected and intertwined aspects involved in giving money to your church each week that are the results of the move from private homes to public buildings for the church's Sunday and midweek gatherings. This had a catastrophic 3-fold damaging ripple effect on the body of Christ. Number 1, by moving the church's gatherings from private homes to public buildings, our so-called leaders created a financial responsibility, the need to pay for a building, when this is something that God never intended nor designed. Number 2, this was followed by the unscriptural practice of salary-based eldership, approximately 75 years later, thereby placing a financial burden on the people of God which he never intended nor designed. And I promise that I will make this ultra crystal clear in 2 videos following this one. And now make no mistake about it, that it is a burden for many single mothers and others who are struggling to make ends meet. Then comes the 3rd damaging effect, which is, in my opinion, the single most catastrophic damaging effect that is the direct result of the church's move from private homes to public buildings. Namely, the removal of the practice of the priesthood of all believers from the church's corporate gatherings each time it meets. And we'll pick it up here in my next video as I explain this in detail, and then I will follow this in a video where I correct the misconceptions that most Christians have about giving money to their church each week, which will help you to get the full picture of just how unscriptural it is for you and I to give money to your church each week for the upkeep of a building and to pay the pastor a salary. So until then, this is Angel Ariano Jr. reminding you to always remember to do all things according to the scriptures.